I took my daughter-in-law's broken phone to get it fixed, but the technician who repaired it pulled me aside and whispered, "Cancel your credit cards, change your passwords, and leave immediately." When I asked what was going on, he turned the phone toward me, and what I saw made my blood run cold. But before we go any further, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love knowing how far our stories reach. My name is Teresa Moore. I'm 65 years old, and until 3 days ago, I believed my life was perfectly normal. I live in a comfortable house in Los Angeles, California with my husband Richard, who's 67. We recently retired. I used to teach history and he was an engineer. We have one son, Michael, who's been married to Sophie for 5 years. From the beginning, I always thought my daughter-in-law was lovely, smart, attractive, well-mannered, and she worked for a financial consulting firm. Michael met her at a friend's party, and they married in less than a year. I sometimes thought she seemed a little distant, but I blamed it on work stress and her reserved personality. Everything began last Wednesday when Sophie came to visit us alone. Something unusual since she and Michael normally came together on weekends. She looked agitated and said she had a problem with her phone. "The screen's completely shattered," she explained. "I dropped it by accident and I need it fixed today. I've got an important meeting tomorrow. Michael's out of town and I don't know where to take it." By coincidence, I had taken my own phone to a small repair shop in the Westwood district the week before. The owner, James Rivera, the son of a former colleague of mine, had done a good job. "I can take it there for you," I offered. "That would be perfect, Mrs. Moore. You'd save my life," Sophie said, handing me the phone. "The password is 280018, our wedding anniversary. I have to run to the office. Can I pick it up tonight?" "Of course," I said. I drove to Rivera Tech Repairs, a tiny store tucked between a pharmacy and a bakery, with a modest sign that read, "Express Repairs." When I entered, James was leaning over a table cluttered with tiny tools and disassembled devices. "Mrs. Moore, nice to see you again," he greeted me with a smile. I explained about my daughter-in-law's phone, and he assured me he could fix it within a few hours. "I'll come back after lunch," I said, handing him the device and the password. Later that afternoon around 4 o'clock I returned. James was alone, and when he saw me his face changed, his cheerful expression fading into something I couldn't read at first. Concern. Fear. "Mrs. Moore," he said softly, glancing at the door to make sure no one else was around. "The phone is ready, but there's something I need to show you." Puzzled, I frowned. "Something wrong with the phone?" "Not with the phone," he replied quietly. Then he leaned closer and whispered, "Cancel your credit cards, change your passwords, and leave immediately." A chill ran down my spine. What are you talking about, James?" He motioned for me to come closer, opened Sophie's phone, and went into her messaging app. He scrolled to a folder labeled Plan B, and showed me the screen. My blood froze. They were text messages between Sophie and my son, describing a plan to kill me. "Mom's getting more forgetful," one of Michael's messages said. "It's the perfect time. The doctor is already documenting her memory lapses at my request. No one will question it when it happens." Sophie's reply made me sick to my stomach. "Your parents' life insurance policy is worth nearly $120,000. Once we sell the house, we'll have enough to start over far away from Los Angeles." My knees buckled and I had to hold on to the counter. This can't be real," I whispered, more to myself than to James. "I swear I didn't mean to intrude," he said. When I was testing the phone after the repair, a notification popped up and I accidentally saw the messages. I couldn't ignore them. I kept scrolling, horrified, through the rest of the conversation. They discussed methods, timing, how to make it look like a household accident, even what medication doses could be fatal for someone my age with high blood pressure. "My own son and his wife planning my death," I murmured. "They're also planning to kill Richard," I added in disbelief as I kept reading. Michael had written, "It has to happen a few weeks apart. An elderly couple dying at the same time would look suspicious." James locked the shop door and flipped the sign to closed. He brought me a glass of water and helped me sit down. "You have to go to the police." His tone was firm but gentle. I shook my head, still in shock. They won't believe me. It'll be the word of a forgetful old woman against my son and daughter-in-law, respectable people in the community. Then you need to gather evidence and protect yourself, he insisted. He was right. With trembling hands, I started taking photos of the messages with my own phone. Every date, time, and detail of their plan, including the mention of our family doctor who, apparently, was being manipulated into creating a false record of dementia. James, could you restore the phone exactly as it was? I don't want them to know we found out anything. He nodded, and we worked together for another hour until the phone looked untouched, as if its dark secret had never been revealed. When I left the shop, it felt like I was walking through a nightmare. The gray Los Angeles sky looked even darker. How could I even go home? How would I look at Richard knowing our only son was planning to kill us both? Worse yet, how could I face Sophie when she came to pick up the phone? Driving back, I planned every step. First, I had to warn Richard without terrifying him. Then we had to act quickly but wisely. If Michael and Sophie suspected we knew, they might rush their plan or come up with a new one. The weight of betrayal was almost unbearable. My son, the child I carried, nursed, helped with his homework, comforted after his first heartbreak, was planning to murder me for money. I parked in front of our house, took several deep breaths, and forced myself to stay calm. The game of life and death had begun, and I had to be smarter than the two young people who thought an aging woman would be an easy target. Little did they know, this woman had faced a military dictatorship in her youth, raised a son alone while her husband traveled for work, and survived breast cancer 5 years ago. If they thought I'd go down without a fight, they were very wrong. I got out of the car, holding Sophie's phone like a bomb about to go off. When I entered the house, I knew life would never be the same again. Richard was in the living room watching the news like he did every afternoon. His familiar face, gray hair, reading glasses perched on his nose, gave me a brief moment of normalcy amid the chaos my life had become. "Did you manage to get Sophie's phone fixed?" he asked absently, eyes still on the TV. I swallowed hard. "Yes, it's fixed." I had to tell him, but I didn't know where to start. How do you tell your husband of 40 years that your only son wants you both dead? "Richard," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I need to show you something. It's serious." Something in my tone must have alarmed him, because he immediately turned off the television and looked at me intently. "What happened, Teresa?" Richard asked. I sat beside him and showed him the photos I had taken of the messages. I watched his face as he read, the initial confusion followed by disbelief, then horror, and finally a pain so deep I thought he might collapse right there. "There must be some mistake," he whispered hoarsely. "Michael would never." I didn't want to believe it either, I replied, holding his trembling hands. "But it's them, Richard. It's Michael's number. It's the way he writes." And Sophie's replies came from her phone, the one I have right here. Richard closed his eyes and took several deep breaths. When he opened them again, I saw something rare in him: absolute determination. "What are we going to do?" he asked. I explained my initial plan: to document everything, check our bank accounts, change all passwords, cancel joint cards, and find out which doctor might be involved. We had to act as if nothing had changed while secretly gathering enough evidence to confront them, or if necessary, take it all to the police. "Sophie will come to pick up the phone tonight," I warned. "We have to act normal." "How?" Richard's voice faltered. "How can I look at her knowing that?" "The same way I've spent 30 years teaching teenagers to pretend they care about medieval history," I said, trying to joke, though my smile came out weak. "One step at a time, Richard. Our lives depend on it." We spent the next hour reviewing our online bank accounts, and what we found was disturbing. Small sums had been transferred regularly from our joint account to an unknown one over the past 3 months. The amounts were small enough not to raise suspicion, $20 here, $30 there, but they added up to about $700. "Michael has access to our accounts," Richard murmured. "We gave him power of attorney last year, remember? In case something happened to us." The irony was bitter. We had trusted him so much that we'd practically handed him the tools for our own destruction. We changed every password, canceled 2 credit cards Michael had as authorized user, and called the bank to block any transaction over $200 without in-person authorization. What about the doctor? Richard asked. Dr. Bennett's been treating us for more than 15 years. He's a friend. He's had lunch here more than once. The thought that he might be falsifying medical reports at my son's request was almost as painful as Michael's betrayal. I'm scheduling an appointment tomorrow, I said. I want to see what he says about my so-called memory issues. At 7:30 that evening, the doorbell rang. Richard and I exchanged a tense look. He squeezed my hand, a silent promise that we'd follow our plan. I opened the door, forcing a smile. Sophie looked as polished as ever, her chestnut hair perfectly styled, her elegant clothes pristine. That flawless appearance now seemed like a mask hiding the monster beneath. Mrs. Moore, I'm sorry for coming so late. How did it go with the technician? Everything's fine, I replied, handing her the phone. James did an excellent job. The screen looks brand new. He turned it on, checked quickly, and smiled. Perfect. How much was it? Let me pay you. Don't worry, it's already taken care of. He didn't charge me, said it was a courtesy since I'm an old client. Sophie hesitated for a moment, a tiny frown that I wouldn't have noticed before. She must have been worried the technician had seen something. Are you sure? She asked. I wouldn't want to cause trouble. Of course not, dear. Do you want to come in? Richard's watching TV. We were about to have some tea. Oh, I can't today, she said quickly. I've got an early presentation tomorrow and still need to review some numbers. I noticed how she avoided meeting my eyes. A skilled liar, but now that I knew what to look for, the signs were there. I understand. When is Michael coming back from his trip? Tomorrow night, she answered without hesitation. Another lie. The messages had shown Michael wasn't traveling at all. He was at home waiting for news from her. Tell him to visit soon, I said casually. We haven't seen him in almost 2 weeks. Of course. He misses you both. She smiled, slipping the phone into her purse. Oh, by the way, have you seen that specialist Michael recommended, the memory doctor? My heart skipped a beat, but I kept my face neutral. Not yet, we haven't had the time. She tilted her head, pretending concern. Michael mentioned you've been forgetting important things lately. Names, appointments. His impression, I said lightly with a small laugh. My memory's just fine. I even remember when you wore that same outfit at my cousin Elisa's birthday party 2 months ago. Something flickered in her eyes, frustration, maybe even worry, before her polite smile returned. Well, it never hurts to get checked, right? At your age. Of course, of course. I'll schedule one soon, I replied. We said goodbye, and as soon as I closed the door, I leaned against it, exhausted from pretending everything was normal. Richard was waiting in the living room, tense. Well, she tried to plant the idea that I'm losing my memory, I said, sitting beside him. They're building the setup for when it happens. What do we do now? We act, I replied, feeling determination rising inside me. Tomorrow morning I'll see Dr. Bennett. After that, I want to check our life insurance. We need to know exactly what Michael changed. And then, we'll set our own trap. That night I barely slept. Every sound in the house felt like a threat. I got up 3 times to check if the doors were locked. Once I found Richard in the kitchen drinking water, his face as tormented as mine. I keep thinking about Michael as a child, he said quietly. Remember how afraid he was of the dark? How he used to run to our bed during thunderstorms? What happened to that boy, Richard? I had no answer. How had our loving son turned into this cold, calculating stranger capable of planning our deaths? We'll find out, I promised, holding him. And we'll survive this. The next morning I called Dr. Bennett's office, claiming an emergency. I got an appointment for 10 o'clock. Before leaving, we checked our online accounts again, and discovered something even worse. There was a new life insurance policy in my name taken out 3 months ago, one I knew nothing about. How is that possible? I asked in horror. Richard scrolled through the digital documents. Look, the signature is yours. I leaned closer, stunned. The signature looked exactly like mine, but I had never signed that document. They forged my signature, I whispered. And there's more, Richard added. Look at the amount. $120,000. And the sole beneficiary is Michael. The reality of our situation hit me full force. It wasn't just an idea anymore. They had already taken concrete steps. Documents were forged, money was being diverted, a doctor might be involved, and now there was a life insurance policy I'd never heard of, ready to be claimed after my accidental death. I left the house feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. The appointment with Dr. Bennett would be crucial. I needed to find out how deeply he was involved in this conspiracy. The office was quiet that morning. The receptionist, who had known me for years, smiled warmly. "Mrs. Moore, good to see you. The doctor will be right with you." Less than 10 minutes later, I was called in. Dr. Bennett, a middle-aged man with gray hair and his usual friendly expression, seemed slightly uneasy when he entered. "Teresa, what a surprise. Michael called me yesterday, said you've been reluctant to do your tests." I kept my expression calm as I sat down. "Really? How strange that he'd say that. In fact, doctor, I came because I'm worried about my memory." Dr. Bennett nodded as if confirming something he already knew. "Yes, Michael mentioned some concerning episodes, forgetfulness, confusion." "How curious," I replied calmly, "because I don't remember having any problems like that." The doctor hesitated for a moment. "Well, Teresa, sometimes patients don't notice their own lapses. It's common in early stages of dementia. And apparently you already have a diagnosis." He seemed increasingly uneasy. "No, of course not," he added quickly, "but Michael showed me some videos. You mixing up dates, forgetting the names of people close to you." "Videos?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "May I see them?" "He didn't leave copies." "Dr. Bennett," I interrupted, leaning forward. "I've been your patient for 15 years. You know me. Do you really believe I have dementia, or are you just trusting what my son says?" The silence that followed was telling. Finally he sighed. "Teresa, Michael has come to see me several times in the last few months. Very worried. He said you and Richard were losing the ability to take care of yourselves, that you needed supervision. He asked me to document any signs of cognitive decline." At least he looked ashamed. "I only recorded what he told me," he said weakly. "I didn't diagnose anything without tests." I stared at him, letting the silence stretch until it became unbearable. "Dr. Bennett, my son is planning to kill Richard and me." The shock on his face seemed genuine. "What? Teresa, that's a very serious accusation. I have proof. And now I understand why he needed your involvement, even if indirect. A medical record documenting cognitive decline would make my death far less suspicious." Dr. Bennett visibly paled. His usually steady hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his glasses. "Teresa, I would never, ever be part of something like that. I truly thought Michael was worried about you." I took my phone from my purse and showed him some of the photos I had taken of the messages. As he read, his face went from disbelief to horror. "My God," he muttered finally. "I had no idea." "I want to see my medical record," I demanded. "Now." He hesitated only for a moment before opening it on his computer. Then he turned the screen so I could read it. It was written in cold, clinical language. "Patient shows signs of cognitive decline as reported by her son. Recurrent episodes of confusion, temporal and spatial disorientation, forgetting names and recent events. Full neurological evaluation recommended." "This is a lie," I said firmly. "And you know it." "Teresa, I only recorded what Michael said. I didn't confirm or diagnose anything. But you created a record that could be used against me, an official medical document suggesting I'm losing my mind. Perfect for when I die in an accident, don't you think?" The doctor looked genuinely disturbed. "What do you want me to do?" "First, print that report and sign it. Then create a new one dated today stating that you personally examined me and found no signs of cognitive impairment." He agreed immediately, clearly shaken by the situation. "And doctor," I added as he typed, "if anything happens to Richard or me, that file, and our conversation today, will be the first things the police see." I left the office with the documents in hand, solid proof of the conspiracy against us. Dr. Bennett had been manipulated by Michael, But his complicity, even through naivety, had almost cost us our lives. Next, I drove to the bank. I needed to personally check our accounts and, most importantly, revoke any power of attorney we had given to Michael. The branch manager, Mr. William Carter, who had handled our accounts for years, looked visibly surprised when I asked to revoke it. "Mrs. Moore, are you sure? Your son came to see me recently and said you wanted to expand his financial authority since Mr. Moore hasn't been feeling well." "Another lie. Richard is perfectly healthy for a 67-year-old man," I said calmly. "And yes, I'm absolutely sure. I also want to review all account activity from the past 6 months." We spent the next hour going over the statements. In addition to the small transfers we'd already found online, we uncovered something even more disturbing. Michael had started the process of getting a replacement credit card in Richard's name, claiming the original had been lost. He said Mr. Moore had misplaced it but didn't want to deal with the paperwork, Mr. Carter explained, now clearly embarrassed. "And you issued a new card without the account holder's presence or signature?" I asked in disbelief. "Well, since he had power of attorney and already handled many of your financial matters." I took a deep breath, holding back my anger. "Cancel that card immediately and block any future attempts to issue new ones without our physical presence." When I left the bank, I felt both relieved to have stopped another part of the plan and terrified by how elaborate it all was. Michael had prepared everything meticulously, crafting a scenario where our deaths would look natural, and he would have complete control over our assets. On my way home, my phone rang. It was him. My heart raced, but I answered in the calmest voice I could manage. "Hi, son. Mom, everything okay? I just got back from my trip. Sophie told me you took her phone in for repair. That was very kind of you." The way he lied so naturally was chilling. There had been no trip at all. "You're welcome, dear. The technician's a colleague's son. He gave us a great price." "That's nice. Hey, I was thinking of coming by tonight with Sophie. It's been a while since we had dinner together, right?" A chill ran through me. Why this sudden interest in visiting? Had they noticed something? Had the doctor called Michael after my visit? "Of course," I said, keeping my tone steady. "Come. I'll make that lasagna you like." "Perfect. Oh, and Mom, did you go to that doctor I recommended? Sophie said you hadn't yet." "As a matter of fact, I saw Dr. Bennett this morning." A brief silence. "You did? And what did he say?" "Nothing major. Ran a few simple tests. Said I'm perfectly fine for my age." Another longer silence. "Oh, well, that's good then. Still, maybe get a second opinion, you know? Sometimes Dr. Bennett is too conservative with diagnoses." "We'll see, son. So dinner tonight?" "Yes, around 7:30. See you later." When I hung up, my hands were trembling. The conversation, though polite, was full of dangerous subtext. Michael had clearly expected Dr. Bennett to declare me cognitively impaired. He was thrown off when he learned the opposite, and now he wanted to come for dinner. Why? To observe my behavior? To see if I suspected anything, or worse? When I got home, I found Richard in the living room surrounded by papers. He looked up anxiously. "How did it go? Was the doctor involved?" I told him everything. How Michael had manipulated Dr. Bennett into creating a false medical record, how he gained access to our accounts, how he forged life insurance documents, and how he'd just called. "He and Sophie are coming here for dinner tonight." Richard turned pale. "Do you think they suspect we found out?" "I'm not sure," I said. But he was definitely unsettled when he realized I'd seen Dr. Bennett and that the doctor didn't find anything wrong with me. We exchanged a long look, the same silent question hanging between us. What could Michael and Sophie try during that dinner? Richard asked at last. "We can't eat or drink anything they bring," he added firmly. "And one of us must always keep watch." I agreed. "We need to record the dinner somehow. If they say anything incriminating." Richard nodded and went to fetch his old digital recorder, the one he used to take notes at work back when he was still employed. We tested it, making sure it worked, and decided where we could hide it in the dining room. I spent the afternoon preparing the lasagna I'd promised, though the thought of sitting across from two people planning to kill us made me physically sick. Every time I remembered the messages, the cold precision with which our own son had discussed our deaths, The pain cut deeper than words could ever express. How did we get here? I asked Richard as we set the table. Where did we go wrong with him? I don't know, he said quietly, his eyes reflecting the same pain in mine. I thought we knew our son. At exactly 7 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Richard and I exchanged one last look of confirmation. The recorder was hidden under the table, already running. Our plan was simple. Act natural, observe their every move, and if possible, provoke a slip-up that we could capture on tape. I opened the door with a practiced smile. Michael and Sophie stood there, he holding a bottle of red wine, she a box of chocolates she knew I loved. "Mom!" Michael exclaimed, hugging me warmly. The touch that once brought comfort now sent chills through me. How could he hug me knowing he intended to kill me? "So good to see you," he said, handing me the wine. "We brought something special for tonight." "Thank you, dear," I replied, discreetly inspecting the label. It was an expensive vintage, one that would have impressed me once. Now it only made me wonder if it had been tampered with. Richard greeted them in the living room, his smile as forced as mine. He offered them water, coffee, juice, anything but the wine they'd brought. "Not yet, Mom," Michael said, settling comfortably onto the sofa. "We'll save the wine for dinner." We made small talk for almost half an hour. Work, the weather, local news. The surreal normality of it all made me nauseous. I watched Michael exchange quick glances with Sophie, saw how she observed my every move, how he asked seemingly harmless questions about my routine, my medication, my recent lapses. "So, Mom," he said finally, leaning forward, "how did your appointment with Dr. Bennett go? Did he run any tests or order anything specific?" "It was a normal visit," I said, keeping my expression calm. "He didn't find anything concerning." "That's strange," Michael muttered, frowning. "He told me he suspected something more serious, maybe early Alzheimer's." "Really?" I asked, raising my eyebrows in feigned surprise. "When did he tell you that?" Michael realized his slip. Last week, when I called him about those episodes I noticed." "What episodes, son? I don't recall having any problems." A condescending smile spread across his face. "See? That's exactly what worries us. Don't you remember? Last week you forgot the name of Mrs. Irasima, our neighbor for 20 years. And then you left the stove on for hours." None of it was true. They were lies crafted to build the illusion of my supposed dementia. "How curious," I said coolly. "I spoke with Mrs. Irasima just yesterday, called her by name, and I haven't even used the stove in days. I've preferred the microwave lately." Michael's smile faltered for a moment. "Dinner's ready," Richard interjected, standing up. "Teresa's lasagna smells amazing." At the table, the performance continued. I served the lasagna while Richard discreetly switched the wine glasses. We had agreed beforehand. We would pretend to drink their wine, but actually sip from another bottle we'd opened earlier in the kitchen. "A toast," Michael proposed, lifting his glass. "To family and health." We raised our glasses and pretended to drink. I watched carefully as Michael and Sophie took actual sips. No hesitation. Perhaps the wine wasn't poisoned after all. "Mrs. Moore," Sophie said, setting her glass down. "Michael and I have been talking. We worry about you living alone in such a big house." "It's true," Michael added. "Especially with these recent episodes, we thought maybe it'd be better if you moved somewhere smaller, easier to manage. Or maybe we could move in with you for a while." I felt Richard tense beside me. That was it. They wanted to move into our home, to be closer, to execute their plan. "How thoughtful of you," I replied evenly. "But we're perfectly fine, aren't we, Richard?" "Absolutely," he said. "In fact, we've been thinking of taking a trip soon, maybe spending some time on the coast in the Florida Keys." I saw Michael and Sophie exchange a quick look. "A trip? Now?" Michael asked sharply. "I don't think that's a good idea, Dad. What about Mom's doctors and your routine checkups?" "All excellent," I answered for him. "We can travel without a problem." Sophie smiled, but her eyes stayed cold. "Do you need help planning it? I could look for hotels, packages." "That won't be necessary," I cut in. "We've already taken care of everything." Dinner continued with that undercurrent of tension. Every seemingly innocent question hid another motive. They were testing our mental state, trying to assert control, searching for ways to get physically closer to us. When I served dessert, a flan I'd made carefully under Richard's watchful eye, Michael brought up a new topic. "I've been talking to an attorney," he said casually, "about broader powers of attorney, for emergencies." "What kind of emergencies?" Richard asked, keeping his voice calm. "Well, if one of you needed hospitalization or, if Mom's memory keeps declining." The lawyer suggested a full authorization that would let me make medical and financial decisions for you. I looked at my son, studying the face I'd kissed as a baby, comforted as a child, photographed proudly at his graduation. How had that face turned into the mask of a cold stranger? "That won't be necessary, son," I said finally. "We've already updated all our documents recently, even made some changes to our will and insurance beneficiaries." Michael's expression froze. "Changes? What kind of changes?" "Nothing unusual. Just making sure everything's in order in case something happens to us." Sophie placed a hand on his arm as if to calm him. "It's always good to review those documents," she said softly. "We consulted an attorney," Richard added smoothly. "Dr. Maurice, the one you recommended. He was very helpful." There was no Dr. Maurice, of course, but the lie served its purpose. Both of them looked momentarily unsettled. At 10 o'clock, Michael glanced at his watch and announced they had to leave. "Work early tomorrow," he said as an excuse. But I knew the real reason: they needed to rethink their plans. After countless fake hugs and empty promises to visit more often, they finally left. As soon as the door closed, Richard and I collapsed onto the couch, physically drained from the effort of keeping up appearances. "They're starting to suspect," Richard whispered. I agreed and got up to grab the recorder. We rewound it and listened to the entire conversation again. The implications were clear. Michael and Sophie were still determined to go through with their plan, but our recent actions, the medical appointment, the bank changes, the mention of the will, had made them cautious. "They'll try something soon," Richard said. "They can't wait much longer now that we're taking precautions." "We need more solid evidence," I replied. "The recording helps, but it's not enough for the police." "What if we tried to make them confess, confront them directly?" I shook my head. "Too risky. They'd deny everything and become more careful." That night we checked all the locks 3 times before going to bed. Even so, I slept with my phone by my bedside and a chair propped against the bedroom door, precautions I never thought I'd need to take against my own son. The next morning I woke with a start to the sound of a car pulling up. I ran to the window and saw Sophie getting out of her black luxury SUV, alone at 8 o'clock in the morning on a weekday when she should have been at work. "Richard," I called urgently, "Sophie's here." He got up quickly, still half asleep. "Where's Michael?" "I don't know. I'll open the door, but stay close." I went downstairs, trying to steady my breathing. Why would Sophie come so early without calling? What did she want? I opened the door before she could even ring the bell. Her face showed surprise for a moment, quickly replaced by a practiced smile. "Mrs. Moore, sorry for showing up so early. I was on my way to work and thought I'd drop off these documents Michael set aside for you." She was holding a yellow folder. "What documents?" I asked, not reaching for it. "Oh, just the power of attorney we discussed yesterday and some articles about early Alzheimer's treatments, things that could help slow the progress of the disease." She extended the folder again. "Michael's really worried about you." I looked at the folder for a long moment. It had to be a trap, probably already filled with forged signatures like the fake insurance we'd found. "Why don't you come in?" I offered, keeping my tone casual. "We can have some coffee and look through it together." Sophie hesitated visibly. "Actually, I'm running late for work. I just wanted to drop this off so you could read it later." "I insist," I said, opening the door wider. "Richard just made fresh coffee. It'll only take 5 minutes." Reluctantly, she stepped inside. I led her to the kitchen, where Richard was pretending to be relaxed, sipping his coffee. "Sophie, what a pleasant surprise," he said. "She brought some documents for us to sign," I explained, emphasizing the word sign. Richard understood immediately. "Great," he said. "Let's take a look." Sophie seemed increasingly uneasy as Richard opened the folder and began scanning the papers. I watched closely, noticing how her eyes followed his every movement, her fingers tapping nervously on the table. "Interesting," Richard murmured after a few minutes. "This document would give Michael full control over our finances and medical decisions. It would practically make us legally incompetent." "It's just a precaution," Sophie said quickly, "considering Mrs. Moore's condition." "And what condition would that be exactly?" I asked sharply. "Well, the memory lapses, the confusion," she said, now clearly realizing she was on dangerous ground. "Michael's noticed several episodes." "How curious," I replied. "Dr. Bennett found no such thing yesterday." "Doctors can make mistakes," she said, regaining her composure. "That's why a second opinion from a specialist is important." Richard placed the documents back in the folder and slid it across the table toward her. "We appreciate the concern, but we're not signing this. In fact, we've already started the process of revoking the limited power we gave Michael last year." Her shock was genuine, if brief, before she replaced it with an expression of studied concern. "But Michael only wants to help." "We're sure he does," I said calmly, "but we prefer to keep control of our own lives." Sophie stood up abruptly. "I have to go. I'm really late." "Of course," I said, walking her to the door. "Tell Michael we'll call him later to discuss these documents." As soon as she left, Richard and I exchanged a look. "They're speeding things up," he whispered. "Yes," I agreed. "Which means we have to act now." After she left, we examined the documents carefully. As we suspected, the power of attorney would give Michael total authority over our finances, property, and medical decisions. There was also a voluntary admission form for a care facility, in reality an institution for elderly patients with severe dementia, with spaces for our signatures. "They're not even trying to hide it anymore," Richard muttered, his hands shaking as he turned the pages. "That's good," I said, surprising him. "The more explicit they get, the stronger our case." I spent the morning photographing every page and creating digital copies, which I sent to my longtime friend Nancy Reed, the only person outside our home I trusted completely. I briefly explained the situation and asked her to store the files safely without telling anyone. "What now?" Richard asked when I was done. "We need a plan. They're moving fast. Sophie's visit, these papers. We can't wait any longer." We decided it was time to seek professional help. Not the police yet, since we still lacked definitive evidence, but an attorney who could help us protect our property and, more importantly, our lives. We chose a lawyer we didn't know personally and who had no ties to Michael. Attorney Laura Hayes, a specialist in family and criminal law. We managed to get an appointment for that same afternoon. In her elegant downtown office, we explained everything to Ms. Hayes. The messages, the bank transfers, the fraudulent insurance, the falsified medical records, the documents Sophie had brought that morning. She listened attentively, taking notes and asking precise questions. When we finished, she took a deep breath before speaking. "Mr. and Mrs. Moore, what you've described constitutes multiple crimes: conspiracy, forgery, attempted fraud, and, most seriously, conspiracy to commit homicide. Do we have enough evidence for the police?" Richard asked. "The messages are the strongest proof," she said, "but since you accessed Sophie's phone without her consent, they could be considered inadmissible. Still, given the severity of the situation and the imminent danger, we can build a solid case." "What should we do first?" I asked. "Immediately, we'll draft legal documents revoking any existing powers of attorney and preventing any new ones without an independent lawyer present. I'll personally serve as a witness to your mental competence. Then we'll file a detailed report including all the evidence we have so far." We spent the next 2 hours signing forms, formalizing statements, and planning each step. Ms. Hayes was meticulous, making sure every legal detail was covered. "Now," she said finally, "we need to address the most urgent matter, your physical safety. I strongly advise you not to go home tonight." Richard and I exchanged alarmed looks. "Do you think we're in immediate danger?" I asked, though deep down I already knew the answer. Based on what you've told me, said Attorney Hayes, yes, they've realized you're taking protective steps. Sophie's surprise visit this morning suggests urgency on their part. If I were you, I'd spend a few days in a hotel under different names until we can get a protection order. We left the attorney's office with a folder full of documents and an overwhelming sense of urgency. We went straight to the Los Angeles Police Department, where we filed a detailed report. The duty officer, Detective Robert Lane, a middle-aged man, listened to our story with growing concern. This is extremely serious, he said after reviewing the evidence. I'll assign an investigator to your case immediately and arrange discreet surveillance for your home. When we mentioned that our attorney had advised us not to go back there, the detective firmly agreed. In fact, it would be safer for you to stay somewhere else for now. But before that, I'd like to send a team to install hidden cameras in your house. With your consent, of course. Of course, I replied. If they try to enter or do anything, we'll have solid proof. We agreed to the plan. We'd return home briefly to collect a few essential belongings while the officers installed surveillance equipment in key areas. After that, we'd check into a downtown hotel under assumed names as the attorney had suggested. During the cab ride back, Richard sat silently staring out the window. As we neared home, he finally spoke. I never imagined I'd live to see the day I'd be afraid of my own son. I squeezed his hand. There were no words that could ease that pain. Our house looked deceptively normal from the outside. The same windows, the same garden we'd tended for years, the same mailbox Michael had painted as a teenager. It was hard to believe that the place once symbolizing safety and family had become the stage for a plot against our lives. The plainclothes officers arrived quietly in an unmarked car. They entered through the back door and worked efficiently, installing small cameras in strategic spots: the living room, kitchen, hallways, entrances. They explained that the footage would be transmitted directly to the precinct and monitored 24 hours a day. Meanwhile, Richard and I packed the essentials: clothes for a few days, medication, important documents. I avoided looking at the family photos on the wall, at the objects that told the story of our life together. Every memory now felt tainted by betrayal. We're all set, said the officer in charge of the installation. The cameras are practically invisible to the eye but record everything in high definition. If anyone enters, we'll know right away. He handed us a small card. This is a direct line to our team. Any emergency, call immediately. Just as we were about to leave, my phone rang. It was Michael. I looked at the officer, who nodded, signaling for me to answer as normally as possible. Hello, I said, trying to sound casual. Mom, where are you? I stopped by the house and no one answered. My heart began to race. He'd gone to our house while we were away. But we're out shopping downtown, I lied. We needed a few things. Oh, I see. I was just worried. You never go out without saying anything. The falseness in his voice made my stomach turn. It was a last-minute decision. We'll be home soon. Perfect. Because I have a surprise for you. I'm waiting here. I froze. He was in our house right now. A surprise? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Yes, I brought that wine you like. I thought we could spend the afternoon together, talk about those papers Sophie dropped off this morning. The officer gestured for me to keep the conversation going. How thoughtful, son. We'll be home in about half an hour. Perfect. I'll be waiting. As soon as I hung up, the officer was already on his radio. Suspect is on site. Repeat, suspect is on site. Maintain distance but stay ready. Turning to us, he explained, we're going to let him stay. We'll watch what he does. If he tries to plant anything, drugs, poison, whatever, we'll have it on video. It'll be irrefutable evidence. The plan made sense, but the thought of Michael wandering through our home, possibly setting a trap, terrified me. What if he finds the cameras? Richard asked. Highly unlikely, the officer assured him. They're the size of a button and placed strategically. Besides, we have agents stationed nearby. We went to a nearby cafe to wait anxiously for updates. Each minute felt like an eternity as I imagined Michael moving through our house, planting evidence, tampering with things, searching for something to use against us. After 40 minutes that felt endless, the officer received a call. He listened intently, nodding as he took notes. "We've got something," he said when he hung up. "Something very interesting on the footage." We rushed back to the station where we were escorted to a monitoring room. Detective Lane was already there watching the recordings from our house. "Mr. and Mrs. Moore," he greeted us gravely. "You should see this." On the screen we watched Michael enter the kitchen carrying 2 plastic bags. He looked around, checked that he was alone, and then began moving methodically. He took out several medication bottles from the bags and placed them in our medicine cabinet, mixing them with ours. Then he opened a bottle of wine, probably the surprise he'd mentioned, and poured in some kind of white powder, stirring carefully before replacing the cork. Finally, he pulled a small electronic device from his pocket and attached it discreetly under the kitchen table. "Probably a microphone or camera," said the officer. "My God," I whispered, covering my mouth. Seeing my own son on video deliberately preparing what looked like our deaths was an agony beyond words. "Now we have more than enough evidence," said the detective. "I'll issue arrest warrants for Michael Moore and Sophie Moore immediately." "What did he put in our medicine cabinet?" Richard asked, his voice trembling. "We'll have it analyzed," Lane replied. "But it appears to be prescription drugs, possibly in dangerous doses. As for the substance in the wine, I'd bet it's a strong sedative." He placed a hand on my shoulder. "Mrs. Moore, I know this is incredibly painful, but you need to understand, your son was actively trying to kill you today. If you'd gone home and drunk that wine—" I couldn't hold back the tears. The full reality hit me at once. It wasn't just text messages or suspicious documents anymore. It was my son in our kitchen poisoning the things he knew we'd use. "What happens now?" Richard asked, holding me as I cried. "We'll arrest them today," said the detective. "With this evidence, there's no chance of bail. You're safe now," he added, "but I still recommend you stay at the hotel for a few more days until everything is resolved." As we left the station trying to process everything that had happened, a uniformed officer hurried toward Detective Lane. "Detective, we just got a call. Michael and Sophie Moore are at the Moore's residence right now. They look agitated. They're looking for them." The detective reacted instantly. "Tactical team, ready up. We're going now." He turned to us. "They've probably realized something's wrong, that you didn't come home as planned. We're going to arrest them immediately. Can we come with you?" I asked, surprising myself. A part of me wanted to run. Another part of me wanted to run and never see Michael or Sophie again. But the stronger part needed to be there, to see the end of this nightmare with my own eyes. The detective hesitated, then finally agreed. "You can stay in the police car at a safe distance, but you cannot interfere in any way." On the way back to our house, with my heart pounding out of control, I kept asking myself how we had gotten here. How had my son, the baby I once held in my arms, become someone capable of calmly planning my death? When we arrived, several police cars were already positioned discreetly around our house. Over the radio, we heard that Michael and Sophie were still inside, apparently arguing about what to do. "They've figured out something's wrong," one officer said. "They keep calling the Moore cell phones over and over." My phone had, in fact, been ringing nonstop for the last few minutes. Always Michael. I ignored every call, just like the officers had told me to. Detective Lane was personally coordinating the operation, speaking quietly into his radio. "Units in position," he finally said. "We move in 1 minute." Then we saw movement. The front door opened and Michael rushed out, followed closely by Sophie. They were both carrying backpacks and looked nervous, glancing around as they headed toward a car parked at the curb. "They're trying to run," Richard murmured. In an instant, several officers came out of hiding, surrounding them with weapons drawn. "Police. Hands where we can see them." I saw the shock on Michael's face, the panic in Sophie's eyes. For a moment, Michael looked like he might try to run, but then he realized he was surrounded. Slowly, they both raised their hands. Within seconds, they were restrained, handcuffed, and placed in separate vehicles. It all happened so quickly and cleanly that it felt unreal, like watching a movie. Detective Lane walked over to our car. "It's done. They're both in custody, charged with attempted murder, conspiracy, and several other offenses. We found the poisoned wine and the medication he planted. We'll have everything analyzed. I looked out the patrol car window and saw my son sitting in the back of a police car handcuffed. Our eyes met for a moment. I didn't see remorse there. Only anger and maybe shock at being caught. And in that moment something washed over me. It wasn't relief. It wasn't revenge. It was an empty kind of grief, like something essential had been torn out of me. We went back to the station to give more formal statements. The police had found incriminating items in Michael and Sophie's backpacks. The original medication bottles he had planted in our house, extra doses of the white powder he had poured into the wine, plane tickets for the next day, and a large amount of cash. They were ready to run, the detective explained. They must have realized something was off, that you didn't come home like you said you would. The plan was clearly to leave the poisoned wine, wait for you to drink it, and disappear before the bodies were found. Richard squeezed my hand tightly as we listened. Every new detail felt like a knife going through my chest. You can see them if you want, the detective offered once the paperwork was done. They're in separate holding cells waiting to be processed. Richard shook his head. He wasn't ready, and I respected that. But something in me needed to look my son in the eye one last time. I want to see Michael, I said, surprising everyone, including myself. The detective led me down a long, cold hallway into a small room with a table and 2 chairs. We'll bring him in here. We'll be watching through the glass. If you feel uncomfortable at any point, just raise your hand and we'll stop immediately. I nodded and sat up straight, folding my hands to hide the shaking. A few minutes later, the door opened and Michael walked in, handcuffed, escorted by an officer. His face was pale, his eyes red, his hair messy. He looked like he had aged 10 years in a few hours. The officer sat him across from me and stepped outside, waiting just beyond the door. For almost a full minute, neither of us spoke. We just stared at each other. Michael spoke first. "They set me up," he muttered, his voice low and bitter. "This is all one big misunderstanding." "Don't lie to me," I said calmly. "No. We're done with that now." He looked away, his jaw tight. "What do you want me to say?" "I want to know why," I said. "Why your own father and me? What did we do to deserve this?" Michael let out a humorless laugh. "You wouldn't understand." "Try me," I said. "I have all the time in the world now." He looked at me again, and there was something cold and calculating in his eyes that I had never seen before. "Money, Mom. It was always about money. You have everything. The house, retirement, investments, insurance. And what are you doing with it? Nothing. Just living your small little lives, saving every penny like you're going to live forever." His words cut, but I kept my composure. "And that justifies killing us?" "It was Sophie's idea at first," he said, as if that somehow made him less guilty. "She works in finance. She figured out what you were worth and got tired of waiting. Why wait decades for an inheritance," she said, "when we could start our real life now?" "And you agreed. Just like that." "Not right away," he said with a shrug. "But she convinced me it would be better for everyone. You're already old. You were going to start having health problems anyway, start suffering. It would have been doing you a favor." The way he said it chilled me. This wasn't the son I knew or thought I knew. "A favor," I repeated slowly. "Poisoning your own parents would be a favor." "It wouldn't hurt," he answered, as if that mattered. "You just fall asleep and not wake up. No pain. Like that wine I prepared today." Michael fell silent for a moment. "How did you find out?" he asked. "It was the messages on Sophie's phone, right? That idiot technician." "Yes, it was the messages," I said. "But even without them we would have figured it out. You weren't nearly as clever as you thought you were, son." He shifted in his chair, the handcuffs rattling. "So now you're going to testify against your own son? Send me to prison?" "You were going to make it look like an accident," I said. "No one would suffer. We'd die peacefully, and you'd finally get the life you think you deserve." "The life I deserve," I repeated, letting the words hang between us. I looked at him, really looked at him, trying to see past the anger, past the coldness, searching for any trace of the boy we raised. I found nothing. "I don't recognize you," I said at last, my voice barely above a whisper. The son we raised, the son we loved, the son we protected. Where is he? I'm right here, Michael said, a flash of emotion crossing his face. It's me. I just grew up. I just got tired of waiting my turn. I stood up slowly. You'll have a good lawyer. We'll pay for that. That's the last thing we'll ever do for you as your parents. After this, don't expect anything else from us, Michael. Mom, he called after me just as I reached the door. You don't understand. I just wanted a real chance to live. I turned one last time. We gave you every chance, son. Education, love, support. The way you chose to live, that was your decision. And you chose this. I walked out of the room feeling as though every step required immense effort. In the hallway, I found Richard waiting. His eyes red, his face marked by tears he wasn't even trying to hide. What did he say? He asked softly. The truth, I answered at last. He did it all for money. Our deaths were just a means to give him the life he thought he deserved. Richard closed his eyes, pain twisting his face. How did we not see it? How didn't we notice what he'd become? I had no answer. The same question haunted me. How parents who had been there for every milestone, who had celebrated every achievement, who had taught values and integrity, could raise someone capable of coldly planning the murder of his own parents. We left the police station in silence and headed to the hotel where we'd stay for the next few nights. On the way, Richard said little, lost in thought. I knew he was replaying every moment of Michael's childhood, searching for the exact point where something had gone wrong. At the hotel, a modest but comfortable place downtown, we asked for a room with 2 single beds. Neither of us mentioned it, but we both knew we needed our own space that night. The pain was too personal, too deep to share, even after so many years together. I lay down exhausted, but sleep didn't come. Images of Michael as a child mixed with the memory of him pouring poison into the wine, creating a waking nightmare I couldn't escape. When I finally drifted off, it was into restless dreams, endless hallways, shadows chasing me, all wearing my son's face. I woke with a start to the sound of my phone ringing. It was Detective Lane. Mrs. Moore, I'm sorry to call so early, he said gravely. We need you to come to the station as soon as possible. There's been a development in the case. The tone of his voice alarmed me. Did something happen? I'd rather explain in person. It's best if you come right away. I woke Richard and told him about the call. 30 minutes later, we were at the station, escorted straight to the detective's office. Mr. and Mrs. Moore, he began solemnly, thank you for coming so quickly. I have some complicated news. What happened? Richard asked tensely. Sophie Moore has requested to make a full statement in exchange for a reduced sentence. She's willing to testify against your son. A lump formed in my throat. What did she say? According to her, Lane continued, the original plan was only to steal from you, to divert money from your accounts, gain control through power of attorney documents. The idea of eliminating you physically came later, when Michael realized you might discover the fraud. Richard gripped my hand tightly. She also claims, the detective went on, that Michael planned to kill her too after you were gone and he had access to all the money. The revelation hit like an explosion. My son was planning to kill his own wife? I whispered. According to her, yes. She found messages between him and another woman discussing how they'd split the money once the Sophie problem was taken care of. I closed my eyes, trying to absorb this new layer of horror. It wasn't enough that he planned our deaths. Michael had been ready to destroy anyone who stood between him and the money. There's more, Lane said, his tone even graver. We analyzed the powder he added to the wine. It's a mix of strong sedatives and a substance called oleander, extremely toxic. It causes cardiac arrest. And we found evidence that he had already started using it before. What do you mean? Richard asked. Samples of your hair, Mrs. Moore, showed traces of the same substance, likely given in small doses to mimic natural health issues. That would explain the memory lapses he claimed you had. They weren't lapses, they were symptoms of slow poisoning. The room seemed to spin. I grabbed the edge of the table to steady myself as the cruel truth hit me. My son had already begun poisoning me. Slowly, methodically. For how long? I managed to ask. It's hard to determine, the detective replied, but based on the samples, at least 3 months. 3 months. I mentally retraced the signs I'd ignored. The frequent headaches, moments of dizziness, nights without sleep. I'd blamed it all on stress, on age, never imagining that my own son was killing me slowly. And what about Mr. Moore? The detective asked, turning to my husband. I feel fine, Richard said, confused. Still, Lane added, we recommend toxicology tests. If your wife was targeted, it's possible he'd started acting against you as well. We left the station more shaken than ever. The thought that Michael hadn't just planned to kill us but had already started was unbearable. Every meal we'd shared in recent months, every cup of coffee he'd kindly made, every pill he'd reminded me to take, all of it could have been part of his plan. We're going to the hospital right now, Richard insisted. We need to check for lasting damage. At the hospital, we were seen immediately after explaining the situation. The doctors ran a full panel of tests, collected blood and hair samples, and admitted us for 24-hour observation. The results confirmed their suspicions. I had detectable levels of oleander in my system, not enough to cause permanent damage but enough to prove ongoing poisoning. Richard's results were clean, suggesting Michael had focused on me first, likely because, as a woman with a prior health history, I'd battled breast cancer years earlier. My death would appear less suspicious. You were lucky, Mrs. Moore, the doctor explained. The slow poisoning was stopped before it caused irreversible harm. Lucky. It was a strange word for the situation. I was lucky to have discovered that my son was poisoning me, before he succeeded in killing me. In the days that followed, the case gained attention we could never have imagined. The story of a son who plotted to murder his parents for inheritance money spread across national media. Reporters surrounded the hotel where we were staying. They called constantly, desperate for statements. We refused every interview, every appearance. Our pain was too deep, too personal to turn into public spectacle. Attorney Hayes became our official spokesperson, handling all legal matters and keeping the press at bay. She was the one who brought the news that Michael would be charged with attempted first-degree murder, with aggravating factors of premeditated poisoning and malicious intent. If convicted, he would face decades in prison. A week after Michael and Sophie's arrest, we finally felt safe enough to return home. The police had removed all surveillance equipment but installed a security system connected directly to the LAPD. Just as a precaution, Detective Lane had said. Stepping back into that house was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. Every room held memories, some beautiful, others now stained by what Michael had become. In the living room, the family photos seemed to mock us. Michael as a child, smiling on his first day of school. Michael as a teenager, proudly holding his swimming trophy. Michael as an adult on his wedding day with Sophie. Moments that once captured a life of love and pride, now revealed as fragments of a reality that, at least in part, had been a lie. Richard walked slowly through the house, touching objects, looking at photos as if he were trying to reconcile the happy past with the devastated present. We need to move, he said at last. I can't live here knowing what happened in this kitchen in this house. I silently agreed. The house that had been our refuge for decades was now soaked in betrayal and danger. That night, lying in our bed, holding hands in the dark, Richard finally said what had been haunting me too. Will we ever understand what happened? How our son became this? I don't know, I answered honestly. Maybe some things don't have an explanation. Maybe some people just choose the wrong path no matter how they were raised. We talked to him, Teresa, Richard said quietly. So many times. About honesty. About hard work. About family. How was that not enough? Maybe for some people nothing is enough. Maybe the emptiness inside them can't be filled. We stayed quiet for a long time, each of us trapped in our own thoughts. Finally, Richard spoke again. What do we do now? How do we move forward after this? It was the same question I had been asking myself. How do you rebuild a life when the foundation itself has been destroyed? How do you ever trust again when the betrayal came from the person you loved most? One day at a time, I said, squeezing his hand. We start over somewhere else. We lean on each other. In the weeks that followed, we put the house up for sale, started looking for a new place to live, and tried in some way to rebuild a sense of normal life. We found a small apartment downtown, nothing like the roomy house where we had raised Michael, and we slowly began moving only the things that didn't carry painful memories. Meanwhile, the legal case moved forward. Sophie reached a deal with the district attorney, agreeing to testify against Michael in exchange for a reduced sentence. Michael, on the other hand, continued to deny the most serious charges, claiming it was all nothing more than a family misunderstanding and that the evidence had been manipulated. 2 months after their arrest, we received a letter from him in jail. Richard wanted to burn it without reading it, but something in me needed to know what he had to say. The letter was short, written in the familiar handwriting I would recognize anywhere. "Mom and Dad, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need to say this. Everything I did out of love. Yes, I wanted the money, I wanted freedom, but I also wanted to spare you the suffering of getting old, becoming dependent, losing your dignity. I don't expect forgiveness. I know what I did is unforgivable in your eyes. But I want you to know it wasn't out of hatred. It was out of ambition. Yes, out of greed maybe, but also out of a twisted kind of love. One day when you're ready, I'd like to see you again. Until then, remember that despite everything, I am still your son, Michael." I read the letter 3 times, trying to find sincerity in his words, some trace of the son I knew. But all I saw was more manipulation, more attempts to justify the unjustifiable. "Out of love," I muttered, folding the letter. "He tried to kill us out of love." Richard, who had finally decided to read it too, just shook his head sadly. "He still doesn't understand. Maybe he never will." I put the letter in a drawer and never answered. Maybe someday, when the pain wasn't so sharp, when I could think of Michael without that crushing mix of love and betrayal, I would find the words to respond. But not now. Not while the wound was still bleeding. The following months blurred into legal procedures, sessions with therapists, and the slow, brutal work of rebuilding our lives. We sold the house below market value. We just wanted to get rid of it as fast as possible. We settled into the apartment downtown. It was smaller, simpler, but it didn't carry the weight of those memories. Michael's trial was scheduled to begin in 3 months. The prosecution had a strong case with overwhelming evidence. The text messages, the video from the house, the toxicology reports confirming slow poisoning, Sophie's testimony, the forged documents. A conviction seemed certain. Even so, the idea of testifying against my own son terrified me. How was I supposed to sit in that courtroom and tell the world how he had methodically planned our deaths? How was I supposed to look him in the eye while sealing his fate? Richard and I talked about it over and over with our therapist, Dr. Susan Grant, whom we had started seeing weekly after everything happened. "You are not responsible for his choices," she kept reminding us. "Testifying is not betrayal. It's telling the truth." "But he's our son," Richard would say. "After everything, he's still our son." "Yes," she would answer. "He's your son. And he is also an adult man who made terrible decisions. Both things can be true." One afternoon, while I was going through some boxes we still hadn't unpacked in the new apartment, I found an old photo album. I sat on the floor and started turning the pages slowly. They were pictures of Michael, as a baby, then a child, then a teenager, always smiling, always surrounded by our love. In one picture in particular, he was about 5 years old, proudly holding up a drawing he'd made. 3 stick figures meant to be our family with a big sun above us. "For the best mom in the world," it said in wobbly, childish handwriting. The tears came and I couldn't stop them. Where was that little boy now? At what moment did that loving child become someone capable of planning his own parents' deaths? Richard found me sitting there, crying over the open album. Without saying a word, he sat down beside me and wrapped his arms around me. We stayed like that, both of us crying for the loss of the son we loved. Not for his physical death, but for the death of who we thought he was. The following week, we got an unexpected visit. Nancy Reed, my friend from the library, the one who had helped me document the evidence against Michael, arrived with a folder full of old newspaper clippings. "Teresa, Richard," she said, visibly shaken. "I found something you need to see." The clippings were from a small local paper in a town in the South, dated 5 years ago. The headlines shouted, Elderly man dies under mysterious circumstances. Niece inherits fortune after uncle's death. Police investigate suspicious death but close case for lack of evidence. What is this? I asked confused. Look at the photo, Nancy said, pointing to an image of a young woman being interviewed. It was Sophie. Younger but unmistakably her. Before she called herself Sophie Moore and moved to Los Angeles, Nancy said, she was known as Caroline Sanders in this small town. And the man who died under mysterious circumstances was her uncle, the one who raised her after her parents died. Richard grabbed the clippings and started reading quickly. She inherited everything. The police suspected poisoning, but they couldn't prove it. Exactly, Nancy said. And do you know what the suspected substance was? I felt a chill go through me. Oleander. Nancy nodded grimly. The same poison they found in your system. The same one Michael put in the wine. The implication was clear and devastating. Sophie hadn't just been involved in this. She was likely the one who brought the idea, the one who knew how to do it, the one who had done it before. Why are you showing us this now? Richard asked. Because her deal with the prosecutor is almost finalized, Nancy said. She's only going to serve a few years in prison in exchange for her testimony against Michael. That's it. Does that seem fair to you? When she has probably done this before. We took the discovery to Attorney Hayes, who immediately contacted the district attorney handling the case. The investigation into Sophie's uncle's death, and possible other similar incidents in her past, was reopened. Within weeks, her plea deal was put on hold and she faced new charges. Police found in her apartment a detailed diary describing not only the plan to kill us, but also notes about her uncle's death and plans to get rid of Michael once she had access to our money. The picture that emerged was even darker than we had imagined. Sophie was a calculating sociopath who had deceived Michael, manipulating him into planning our deaths. She had used him as a pawn, intending to dispose of him as soon as she got what she wanted. When Michael learned about this during a preliminary hearing, he broke down. According to his lawyer, he finally realized the full extent of the manipulation he had suffered, though that didn't erase his guilt for taking part in it. That was when we made a difficult decision. We would visit Michael in prison, not for forgiveness or reconciliation. It was too soon for that if it was ever possible. But we needed to face the truth to try to understand. The penitentiary was a cold, oppressive place. We followed a guard down gray corridors into a small visiting room, waiting in tense silence. When the door opened and Michael walked in, handcuffed and wearing the orange prison uniform, my heart sank. He had lost weight. His face was pale with dark circles under his eyes. He looked much older than his 35 years. When he saw us, tears immediately filled his eyes. "Mom, Dad," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "We came," Richard said simply, sitting down. There wasn't much to say. The distance between us was too vast to be bridged with words. Still, being there, offering that small trace of human comfort, felt important not just for him but for us too. "I'm so sorry," he finally said. "For everything. I know it doesn't mean much after what I did, but I had to say it." "Why did you try to take your own life?" I asked directly. He looked at his bandaged hands. "Because I finally understood what I'd done. Not just the plan, the lies, the manipulation, but how deeply I hurt you, how much I destroyed. And I realized I could never fix it." For the first time since everything had happened, I saw something real in his eyes. Not manipulation, not self-pity, but genuine understanding of the pain he had caused. "You're right," Richard said gently but firmly. "Some things can't be fixed. But that doesn't mean you should give up." "Why not? What's left for me?" "Life," I said simply. "Imperfect, difficult, confined within these walls for many years. But still life. The chance to maybe one day do something good with it." We stayed only half an hour. We didn't promise to visit regularly or offer easy forgiveness. We just said goodbye, leaving in the air a faint possibility of some future connection. On the way home, Richard and I were silent for a long time, processing the visit and the conflicting emotions it stirred. "Did we do the right thing?" he finally asked. "I don't know if there is such a thing as the right thing in situations like this," I answered. I just know I don't regret going. 4 years after uncovering the conspiracy against our lives, Richard and I celebrated 45 years of marriage. We decided not to do anything grand, just a quiet dinner at home with a few friends who had stayed by our side through it all. During the dinner, as I watched Richard tell a story that made everyone laugh, I realized something important. We were happy again. Not the same kind of happiness as before, but a deeper, more conscious one. We had faced the worst life could offer and survived. We had rebuilt something out of the chaos, found meaning after destruction. And most importantly, we had chosen not to let betrayal poison the rest of our lives. Michael remained in prison, where he would spend many more years. After his suicide attempt, he seemed to have found a kind of purpose. He began studying law through an inmate education program, hoping someday to help other prisoners. We visited occasionally, not often but enough to maintain a fragile connection. Sophie served her sentence in a maximum security prison, refusing any contact with us. From what we heard, she still denied responsibility for all her crimes, always blaming others. As for us, we learned to carry our story without letting it define us. When we met new people, the truth eventually came out. Our city wasn't that big and the case had been notorious. But we found that most people were kind, compassionate, and respectful of our pain. Some nights I still wake up startled, remembering that moment in the electronics repair shop when James turned the phone screen toward me and my world fell apart. Sometimes Richard still has nightmares in which Michael succeeds in his plan. But those shadows appear less often now, replaced by the light of the present, the small joys of everyday life, new friends, rediscovered hobbies, and the love that survived the unimaginable. On the night of our 45th anniversary, after all the guests had left, Richard and I sat on the balcony of our apartment, looking up at the starry sky. "Who would have thought," he said, holding my hand, "that after everything we'd still be here together, survivors?" I smiled, squeezing his hand. "More than survivors," Richard corrected softly. "We're living." And he was right. We weren't just surviving, we were truly living, consciously grateful. We had learned the hardest way that life is fragile, that even the closest relationships can hide terrible secrets, that betrayal can come from where you least expect it. But we had also learned that human strength is extraordinary, that it's possible to start again even after total devastation, that love, real love, not the distorted version Michael once claimed to feel, can endure even the worst storms. 5 years after that fateful afternoon at the repair shop, I look back and see not just tragedy but growth, the strength that came after. I didn't choose this path, I didn't ask for this pain, but I accepted the challenge to rebuild, to find meaning, to keep loving despite it all. And maybe that's the greatest victory, refusing to let hatred, bitterness, or fear define you. Choosing, every day, compassion, courage, and hope, even knowing how dark the world can be. James, without realizing it, gave me more that afternoon than just the chance to survive. He gave me the chance to discover a strength I never knew I had. The strength not only to uncover a conspiracy, but to rebuild a life from nothing, to love again, to trust despite the scars. And for that, I will be forever grateful. If this story moved you, click subscribe and tell us in the comments which part left you speechless.